Hello folks, welcome to the PT on Ice Daily Show brought to you by the Institute of Clinical Excellence. My name is Dustin Jones. I am one of two lead faculty members in the Older Adult Division teaching the modern management of the older adult curriculum. So that's online Essential Foundations, online Advanced Concepts, and then the 2-day live course. I am currently sitting in the physical therapy department at the University of British Columbia in Vancouver. Me, Christina, and Alan taught an awesome course to an awesome group of people this past weekend. We had some amazing conversations around many things, but we ended up talking a lot about falls and balance training and things to consider in a more holistic picture of really reducing falls. And that goes along with the segment or the series that we've been doing over the past few weeks on Jerry on Ice on Wednesdays, which is going beyond the Berg. How can we go beyond the standard balance assessments that we're all familiar with, like the Berg, for example, to really get a bigger picture of people's risk of falling, their balance capacity, their limitations, and how can we actually intervene? And sometimes that may be a referral based on a visual impairment we notified. Sometimes that is actual balance training, and we really want to tease this out. And so a lot of this series has been talking about assessment of the different inputs that allow us to maintain stability on our feet, also testing the outputs in terms of how we organize some of those sensory inputs, our reaction timing, anticipatory behavior, some things along those lines. Today I want to speak to some factors that we haven't really talked about, which is these externally based factors that can impact sometimes people's performance, but definitely their risk of falling, and something that we do want to address. We speak to this when we have our falls prevention lecture in the MMOA course, but I want to speak to this here as well because it's very pertinent to the series that we've been doing titled Beyond the Berg. So today, external factors that can contribute to the risk of falling as well as someone having impaired balance. So the first one I really want to speak to is the environment. The environment for someone that may be in the home setting is very, very obvious. If you're in acute care, some type of facility, or even an outpatient, you may not necessarily be aware of environmental challenges that your patients face. That doesn't mean we shouldn't get an idea and assess them. Can be challenging, but I want you all to give an effort to do so. So in the home, you typically see some trouble areas for folks that lend them at risk for a fall or may have issues with their balance. Going into their house, whether it's steps or just going over a threshold, managing opening up a door and being able to go through their front door can be challenging. Back door as well, or from the garage into their house can be an issue. The bathroom is typically an issue for folks, especially if there is requiring a lot of pivoting or if they can't get their assistive device through the doors of the bathroom to safely get in there. Also around the bedroom, getting in and out of the bed and kind of maneuvering through that area. Those are some pretty common areas that can give folks some trouble. And you can ask questions. How is it getting in and out of your home? How is it getting in and out of your bathroom? How is it getting in or around your bedroom? Asking these questions can be very helpful. Or asking them, are there areas of your home that give you concern? And so you can dig into that and give them some suggestions. It may be something like a rug, the dreaded rug that we all talk about. Good luck removing that, by the way. I've been very unsuccessful in moving many rugs. Some folks are better at it than others. But typically rugs are going to be some type of tripping hazard. But I want you to think too about furniture placement. So I've had many patients that have been reluctant to moving a rug per se, but have been more open to maybe shifting pieces of furniture around a little bit to provide a very opportune handhold, let's say coming into the house, for example, sliding over that chest over just a little bit closer to the door frame so that when they do make that step, they have a handhold to give them some stability. Some of those things, or maybe moving a furniture away to give more space to allow a pivot turn, for example. These are some things that seem very small and subtle, and maybe not even pertinent for your work as a clinician, but I guarantee you, in terms of the quality of the life and the experience in their home and the risk of their falling, this can be very, very helpful. So home modifications are absolutely huge. If you want a resource to really start this conversation, I highly recommend AARP's Home Fit Guide. So if you search Home Fit, all in one word, guide, that is going to be very, very helpful. That will give recommendations. It's almost like a checklist that you can give to your patients. Low-hanging fruit that we can make an environment much more safer and functional for a lot of people. That's going to be very, very helpful and will have a big impact on folks. Another external factor is the assistive devices. Many of the folks we work with are going to have some type of assistive device. It would be foolish of you to assume that that is well suited for them. It's very easy to just assume, oh, well, they've had PT before. That cane or that walker is an appropriate height for that person, is appropriately fitted, or they need it. Don't make that assumption. Do an assessment, like we've talked about, but you definitely want to check that sizing and play around with it. If you ignore that, you may be really leaving a lot on the table in terms of dramatically improving their performance. So assistive devices are huge, home modifications are huge as well. And then I also want to speak to footwear. Footwear can be very, very vital and important for our patients in terms of their functional ability, in terms of their falls risk, and also implementation of some of the movements that we talk a lot about on this podcast, like the squat, like the deadlift. So let me go through a few things that you really want to consider when we're speaking to older adults. So the first thing that you want to check is the actual fit of their shoe. So with many folks, the factors of the ease of getting a shoe on and off could ultimately dictate what type of shoe as compared to the actual fit of the shoe. Let me explain. If someone has a very, very wide foot, or they have a really tough time getting their foot inside of a shoe, oftentimes they will prefer a much, much larger shoe, one that is way too big for their foot. That can be somewhat of an issue, especially if their foot is moving around a lot in that shoe. So trying to encourage a better form-fitting shoe with someone that is actually going to accommodate the size of their foot and not go way beyond that. A lot of times I've found that Velcro is going to be super helpful. There's also some interesting lacing things that you can buy in terms of magnetic laces that make a properly fitting shoe a little easier to get on and off. I'll put links to that in the Facebook post description. So if you're on Instagram or you're listening to the podcast, go on Facebook to this video. In the description, I'll have some links for some of those ideas. Occupational therapists are great at this. If you have any OT friends or colleagues, talk to them about how to get a shoe on and off easier, and they'll be familiar with a lot of these different lacing systems. Something else to think about too is the fit in terms of length. Is it an appropriate length, but also is it an appropriate width? So this is a Reebok Nano. This is a typical fitness CrossFit shoe. But if you notice the size of the toe box, it's relatively wide. A lot of typical running shoes, you're going to see the toe box kind of narrow to where it creates a point in the middle of the foot, versus a nice wide toe box like a Reebok Nano. Ultra ALTRA is also great at this. That it will actually kind of taper a little bit but be closer to the bigger toe. And this is closer to the anatomical shape of a foot. And so a lot of times people will buy shoes that may accommodate their length but not necessarily accommodate for the width of their foot, but they still cram their foot into that shoe. So you would want to check that, see how that shoe fits, and you may want to try something that has a wider toe box. So a Reebok Nano, you may recommend that to your 86-year-old patient and say, you got some pretty cool shoes there. You're going to be pretty hip amongst the CrossFit crowd. Or Ultra, ALTRA, they have some casual shoes that have some pretty wide toe boxes as well. But that's something that you want to think about. Think about the length of the shoe, but also the width of that toe box, because a lot of people are going to try and cram their foot into a narrower toe box that may not necessarily be the best thing for them. Another thing that we want to think about is their protective sensation. So if you have the Sims-Weinstein monofilament, that you can test their protective sensation to get an idea of, is it really appropriate for them to be walking around barefoot or to have slippers on all the time if they're not able to feel or detect if they have some type of ulcer or wound. You want to really test that and have that conversation with them. You also want to think about what they're wearing throughout the day, but then also some of the activities that you're going to ask them to do. So oftentimes we are going to get a lot of our patients deadlifting, for example, but many of their shoes are going to have a pretty significant drop from the heel to the front of the foot. An average running shoe may be something like 17 to 22 millimeters. I believe a Reebok Nano has about 3 to 5 millimeters, something along those lines. But many of the shoes that our patients are going to wear are going to have a pretty significant slope from the heel to the front of the shoe. And that is not necessarily a huge issue, but if you're trying to perform a hip hinge or a deadlift type motion where you're trying to encourage them to shift their weight posteriorly, that slope of the shoe may influence them to maybe go a little more anteriorly into more of a squat pattern. So what you can do is say, hey, maybe instead of doing this deadlift with this shoe, let's take the shoe off and be flat. And that is going to encourage them to or shift their weight posteriorly and probably get a better result trying to do that deadlift. The reverse applies for the squat. If you're having people try and do air squats or even weighted goblet squats, especially if they're older adults and they have issues with their ankle dorsiflexion, and if they're in their hospital grippy socks or their house shoes or barefoot, if they don't have that ankle mobility and they're flat-footed, you're really kind of setting them up for failure when you're putting them through a squat type pattern. That can be helpful to actually throw that shoe back on where they do have some type of slope going from the heel to the forefoot that's going to make that squat a lot smoother. They'll be able to increase that depth and keep their trunk a little more upright. So that's something that you want to think about with your exercise prescription in terms of shoe fit. A slope from heel to toe is going to be helpful typically with folks, especially older adults with a squat, and you want a flatter shoe or no shoe with a deadlift that will be more encouraging to shift the weight posteriorly. So those are some things you want to think about. You want to think about the home environment. What can we modify? What's a low-hanging fruit? The Home Fit Guide can help you with that. We want to think about assistive devices. Are they appropriately prescribed? Are they appropriately fitted? Is it appropriate for that person in front of you? Assess that. Don't just assume that it's going to fit because another therapist prescribed that. We want to assess. And then last but not least, we do want to check that they have proper footwear, that it fits well, that they're able to get that shoe on and off. We may want to accommodate with special magnetic laces, for example. And then also think about what shoes they are in or no shoes based on the exercise that you are performing. If you are doing a deadlift, you may want them in a flatter shoe or no shoe or a house shoe. If you're wanting them to do squats and you're weighing down the squat, they have a tough time keeping that upright torso and limited ankle dorsiflexion. A slope from the heel to the front of the foot is going to be helpful for them. Okay, so those are some things I want y'all to think about. We're going to continue on our Beyond the Berg series in a couple weeks, talking about specific interventions based on this assessment process. So we've talked a lot about these intrinsic factors. I just talked about some extrinsic factors. Now let's talk about how can this assessment actually inform some of these interventions to improve one's balance capacity. Once again, today is Wednesday. It's Jerry on Ice. So Jeff Moore just sent, hopefully most of you all, a lovely email called Hump Day Hustle. This is a weekly email he sends out Wednesdays at 8:30 a.m. Eastern Standard Time with some of the top 5 nuggets of clinical wisdom that the faculty at ICE has come across. So whether it's a research article that's open access that you can read, or a social media post is very informative, or a really cool video that we saw that helped us in our practice in some way, shape, or form, we send it to him. Jeff cooks it together and he ships it out Wednesday mornings. If you are not on that, you're missing out on a very valuable free resource, and you can get on that at ptonice.com and click the Hump Day Hustle tab. Other than that, I hope to see some of you all in Modern Management of the Older Adult Advanced Concepts. It starts March 11th, and our next online cohort is Essential Foundations that is starting Take care.
Hey, thanks for tuning in to the PT on Ice Daily Show. If you enjoyed this content, head on over to iTunes and leave us a review. And be sure to check us out on Facebook and Instagram at the Institute of Clinical Excellence. If you're interested in getting plugged into more ICE content on a weekly basis while earning CEUs from home, check out our virtual ICE online mentorship program at ptonice.com. While you're there, sign up for our Hump Day Hustling newsletter for a free email every Wednesday morning with our top 5 research articles and social media posts that we think are worth reading. Head over to ptonice.com and scroll to the bottom of the page to sign up.